Hey there, friends. It's Nick Warren, and I'm with Matt Goddard again. And today, Matt, I believe we're going to talk about, well, it's one of the other principles that we mentioned in the first video in this series. We're going to talk more about visibility and the practical ways in which visibility benefits the business of digital development and how you use it on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Yes. So, what is visibility? I think the way that I define visibility is across your different stakeholder or touch point groups. So, what does visibility look like with your peers, with your boss, and what does it look like with your customer? And I distinguish boss from peers simply because there's a level of reporting that you need to do to your people in your hierarchy that you don't need to do with your peers. Specifically, the type of information that you are needing to be visible with is different. So let's start with peers, which is probably the easier one, I would say. But in a practical sense, what we're talking about here is how do you, when you are working on a project, when you are trying to deliver it to an outcome, what are the mechanisms or tools that you need to use to make sure that the people that are driving towards that same goal with you are able to contact you, to know what your availability is, to understand all of the sort of touch points or all of the signifiers that they would have that you are available to them to support them, or they are available to you to support.
And this is particularly relevant, presumably, if you're in a remote team, as you guys are.
Yes, it's absolutely relevant for remote workers. I think, interestingly, I think it's as important for office-based people as well. So the way that I think about it is that, you could be sat in a bank with people, and there are things that you do every single day to try and to make it obvious to somebody. If you are in a meeting, you might put some headphones on or say you don't want to be disturbed, actually, you might put headphones on and,
Yeah.
sort of zone out. That's a clear signifier to somebody that you are not to be disturbed at that point. So, when they aren't on, or then, that's when, you can be interacted with. If you're, and the thing about remote working, of course, is that none of those cultural sort of real world environmental signifiers exist to somebody. You're in a black box unless you choose to show somebody that you are being visible or that you are, accessible to contact, then you might not be, as far as anyone's concerned, you might not be. And that's where the real risk runs in to all of this,
Yeah.
is that if you don't put the effort in to be visible, then it could look like you have just fallen off the face of the earth for 5 days,
Yeah.
which just causes friction. It may be you might just have your head down doing work, but actually what it does is it causes a lot of friction in the rest of your team, which then, if unchecked, can cause animosity and sort of ill blood between colleagues, which I've seen happen in the past.
That's because they might think you're not pulling your weight.
It's the vacuum of knowledge. So
Okay.
because they don't have anything to fulfill that void of what are you up to, they can't readily answer the question, what's Matt up to? What's Nick up to today?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
therefore they make it up. And making it up might be, I don't think Matt works all the time anyway. I mean, he could just be out, on his stand-up paddleboard or something. You know what I mean? There might be a number of different reasons going through someone's head.
We do say that about you a lot, to be fair.
I'm renowned, renowned. So therefore, you have to come up with ways of making yourself visible. So it's very practical things like, I don't know, making sure that your light is set to active in Slack so that it looks like
Okay.
you're available. When you're available, that it looks like you're available. Making sure that your calendar is accessible to people so that they can know when to book appointments with you, for example. They're obvious practical senses, but the idea is for you to have a healthy relationship with your peers so that you can say, you know what, for this period of time, I am available to you to talk about whatever it is you need to talk about. And for this amount of time, I'm not available to you. Now, the great thing, of course, about remote working is that you can do something called asynchronous working, which is, I say in quotes because there's a big, there's still a big discussion in the remote working space about difference between synchronous collaboration and asynchronous
Oh,
collaboration and the
really?
skill set. Yeah, but the skill sets are still very new to a lot of people, and
Mm.
trying to do it in a way that makes everyone feel comfortable is quite can be quite challenging. But so with sort of asynchronous communication, it's your job to make it so that the work you're working on is also visible, not just your status, your availability, but making sure that the work you do is visible to the people around you. So let's say, for example, I'm working on design work, like I'm
Mhm.
working on a set of wireframes, you know, making sure that I add it's let's say in this instance I'm working with Figma, for
Yeah.
example. Now, Figma is obviously an online design tool. You can share your document with other people so that they can see what you're doing. And, there's a lot of fear in that. It makes you vulnerable for you to make your work available to other people all the time. But actually, well, especially when you're in a remote working experience, that's is absolutely essential, because if you aren't making your work visible, if you aren't visible, then it might be that you do 5 days of work, which is completely irrelevant. And if that isn't caught early enough, then it will, it causes, from a digital delivery perspective, you are then, you're 5 days further behind where you should have been had you not had one simple
Yeah.
conversation with somebody.
I've lost count of how many times I've seen the result of people who very efficiently done the wrong thing.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. That's exactly the right way of describing it as well, isn't it? Because I'm a firm believer that everybody on the whole does the right thing, does their hardest in their work to do the best that they can, regardless. But that doesn't mean to say that you don't make mistakes and you don't misunderstand what it is that you're doing. When we talk about clarity and other things, that's a big part of being visible, is
Mm.
making sure that you understand what it is you're doing and why. And once you understand that, then it's making sure that you are sharing your work early and often, that you're using tools that really promote, collaboration
Yeah.
on those areas, and then, sort of go from there, really. So that's, and it,
Yeah.
and
It's like writing. Obviously, I do a lot of writing, and the arrival of things like Google Docs, which allow, yes, you to share your work, and that requires a bit of, as you say, vulnerability, because
yeah,
you know writers, I think, like a bit like designers, that we're sort of
yeah.
famously protective, and we don't want to show anyone anything until we've got it exactly right, until we've got all our arguments and what have you. But
And you've done all the
the
research you
value of
need, and
sorry.
you've done all the research that you need and
You
depth and
want, of course, we all want it to be right. One of the things you learn when you're writing for other people, um, professionally, is the earlier they can see the direction, the better, because it might be very efficiently
yeah,
going in the wrong direction. There might be something that's a problem, and you don't want to wait to find that out. We want to find that out as early as possible, which means early access to things, and it also means making sure that the feedback is well, I always tell people you can't upset me.
yeah.
It's that same kind of idea, isn't it? Visibility through the work.
Yeah, I think probably, I always think that visibility is the hardest of the principles, if I'm honest.
Okay.
Because I think that showing being vulnerable in that way, showing your work early and often, and even setting the tools up so that they give a clue as to what people are doing. So
Mm.
I call them progress indicators, but there are things like, for example, when you finish a set of screens, you might want to put them in dev mode, and then you can get that to link into Slack, and then you can have an alert in Slack to tell you that, something's changed within the design
Right.
systems. You don't have to do anything. If you set that up once, you don't have to do anything again in order for that to keep your team informed about what it is that you're doing. So if you are ready to share some screens with your development team, for
Yeah.
example, then you can just set that into the correct dev mode and you can push it into a channel. So it's not something that you have to, um, it's not something that you have to go to the effort of doing every time,
Yeah.
but you have to put the effort into understanding why you need to be visible, to accept that you're going to be vulnerable, because it might be that you have misunderstood and you are doing something wrong and you need to be course corrected. And it might be that, It might be that you just need to, maybe you just need to get support on something. You need to be vulnerable enough to be able to turn around to, like, Nick, say you and I are working on a project together and I'm not, really clear how to deliver a part of what I'm working on. And,
Yeah.
being able to be vulnerable and visible and say, Matt, Nick, I've got to get this work done by 12 o'clock tomorrow, but I'm really struggling, or I've been overburdened with other work and I've not got round to it. They're the things that you just need to do. There's no rocket science to this particular thing, except for it really goes against the grain of the modern workplace, where everyone feels like they need to do everything perfect all the time and they need to be brilliant, because if you aren't brilliant, then you are going to be replaced. And that fear is the antithesis of visibility.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, the flip side of that is if you are able to be vulnerable with other people, they will find it easier, not always easy, but easier to be vulnerable with you. So it creates a kind of virtuous circle in a way.
And then what does that do? That builds trust. Trust is our principle, our primary principle, isn't it?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's by doing those things. And it's exactly the same with clients, right?
yeah,
Exactly the same with clients. We're all, at the end of the day, we're all human beings trying to work together to deliver on an outcome. And, our clients are part of that. Sometimes things don't go very well, and therefore you need to be visible with them about progress and how you're doing. And I think, I've worked on both sides of the sort of agency world. I've worked to client side and I've worked in agencies. I've run my own businesses and stuff like that. And I can one thing, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, Nick, but one thing you can absolutely 100% agree is that your clients will know instantly if you're feeding them a line. If you're saying to them, there's some strange technical reason why we haven't been able to share this set of documents with you today, or something like that.
yeah.
That everyone knows that that's not the case most of the time, and therefore, you end up eroding that trust.
I mean, I think it comes down to what you never want to do is surprise a client. I mean, in a bad way, obviously, you never want to surprise a client. If there's a problem, well, it's the same as I was just talking about with the writing.
Yeah,
You need to surface it early, and they need to understand it early. And it's you know, early problems are easy to fix. Late problems can be impossible to fix,
yeah,
or at least, and incredibly hard and very damaging, as you say, on that kind of
yeah.
trusted relationship. So, but when you're
And
talking about visibility for clients, though, are you talking about having the clients be able to look into these systems, these things you're working on, these documents, or is it more about sort of regular
I,
reporting? How does it work for you?
I think it's both. I think there is your rituals. There's your standard set of activities that you do. I think it's really important to have like a weekly session with your client where you just, you say to them, this is what we're planning this week. This is what we delivered, and making those assets available to them at the time. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Also, I love the idea of having show and tells with internally and with our stakeholders involved, our client stakeholders involved with that as well, because I think it creates a sort of a success mindset within the teams, which I think is a wonderful idea. But at the same time, I have no problem at all with giving my client access to our Figma documents, our Miro boards, Word documents, whatever they are. I have no problem at all with that, personally speaking. Sometimes it can cause challenges because if you're halfway through something and the client looks at it and then they like, well, isn't this finished yet, or what have you? But that's just a conversation to be had. And sometimes it's challenging when you get a whole bunch of comments about design work that is still in progress. But if
Yeah,
you
that's
can,
fantastic, isn't it?
but if you can flip that, if you can flip that on its head. And what I try and do when I get comments on design work that we're working through currently, what I try and do is use that as an indicator to establish how aligned I am continuing to be with what they want. So if somebody puts a comment in and says, "Oh, are you sure we should do this here because of this reason?" Then that reason is usually a good indicator to me that there's a level of the user story or whatever it is that I need to keep in mind as I'm continuing my development work. So actually it provides value, but it does add an overhead. So, I can see why some people don't do it. I err on the side of, I think it's right to err on the side of, creating as much visibility as you can. Typically, most people self-regulate on, like whether they want to consume that information or not, on the whole. Your clients are as busy as you are, and
Yeah.
therefore they're not going to be sat there every single day just watching your mouse move around in Figma, are they? So
Watching the Figma
yeah,
technology.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think I think it comes back to vulnerability and like organizational vulnerability. And sometimes sharing things too early, you worry that, you're not presenting the best version of whatever it is you're doing to your client. But, we're all humans at the end of the day. I keep coming back to this in my mind. I'd much rather they saw our workings out and,
Yeah.
sort of move from that, really.
I think that's a very fundamental idea, though, isn't it? The idea of the perfect finished thing is really a misnomer because what we end up doing, whether it's writing something or developing something, is iterating towards the best solution. Because even if you've got the perfect thing and you show your client, well, they're going, but if they haven't seen it, they're definitely going to have ideas. And even then, they have an audience, they have customers or prospects or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
who will also use it and will also have thoughts and very often not be shy about sharing them. So, you know, part of this, part of this visibility thing is about being comfortable with the fact that we're sharing things that aren't finished because actually the finish is a long way away. And
Yeah.
for some products, it never finishes. It's just more iteration, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. The thing that I will add to that is that sometimes by being visible, you actually learn when when you need to stop. Sorry, I do apologize. Sometimes um you could be going down a road and your client might turn to you and say, "Yeah, that's good enough. That's what we want." It may not be what you think is the end product, for example, the real end state, but actually a lot of the time appropriateness is as good as, you know, perfect, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, yeah,
And sometimes you can't judge that for yourself. And the other thing I will say is that we talk a lot, obviously, with our backgrounds and business I run and your background, Nick, about how this works in the digital delivery space. So in terms of software development and stuff like that. But these things are equally as true in a whole bunch of other areas of your business, of any business. If you're collaborating on documentation, if any time you're working in a team,
yeah, yeah,
then it is incumbent upon you to be as visible as you can be with your peers and with your boss and with the recipients, the client of those outcomes. Like that's par for the course. And so I think you've got that day-to-day visibility, and then you've got things like project tracking and task tracking and other stuff that's relevant for your boss that isn't day-to-day visibility, I suppose, in terms of, what am I doing right now, but are really important, like with your clients, but really important touch points to make sure that you are keeping everyone informed of what you're doing. So things like how you use Trello or Monday.com or any of those particular tools to track your progress through a system, a process of delivery. Within our case, it's obviously a digital delivery process that requires,
yeah.
requirements analysis, design, development, test, deploy into prod. All those steps are, the states of our system. If you're doing I don't know, like a report for your AGM or something like that, then you will have a similar set of states in regards to, like well, when you're writing a book, Nick, and we do with the articles we write,
Mm.
you have your backlog of things you want to do, and then you have your, like this is in progress, this is first draft ready for a review, second draft ready for review, and they're all exactly the same system
Same idea.
derived. Yes, and the idea is about the state of the system rather than the status of the task. Does that make sense?
Explain that more. State
So,
of the system versus the state of the task.
so if we consider our process, our delivery process,
Yeah,
right? We know, I'll just repeat it again. We have our backlog of all the things that we might like to do. We then have, when we take an item from our backlog, we then have to put it into design. Design gets signed off. Then it moves into development handover. The development team pick that up and they work on it. They think they're done, so they move it in ready for test. Once it's in ready for test, it then goes up to the test environment, then maybe the UAT environment, and then maybe eventually to client sign off and then to production. So that's the system of the digital delivery system. So what we're interested in is understanding where that task relates to that system. So that's the, in my opinion, the best way of creating visibility across a digital delivery system. Now, the other way of doing that is you have a bunch of tasks in your backlog, and then you have literally two states: in progress
Doing
and
done
done.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
All right.
So in order for you to understand at what stage of the process that task is, because you don't just want to know whether something is either, if something is in doing, sorry, let's just create some clarity here. If I move something into doing, in order for it to get to I've just picked this up to it's actually done, all of the steps, all those stages of the process that we talked about need to happen.
Yeah.
But because you've got that card only in the doing column of your, if you use a Kanban approach, then you can't easily see the stages of the journey that that card is in.
Yeah.
So you are telling somebody that you're doing something. You might have 5 things in doing,
Yeah.
but I've got no idea, or there might be 5 tasks that are in progress in your team,
Yeah.
but I've got no idea who's responsible for it, what stage of the process it's at, and how much more likely, or when is it likely to be finished.
Yeah.
If I know that something's in client sign off, for example, I know that actually we're really close to deploying that, for example. But if it's just in progress, I've actually got no idea how close that is to being done, really.
Yeah.
I can't tell from the system.
So what you're saying is rather than the kind of backlog in progress done approach, the Kanban boards that you guys use would be one column for every set stage right through all the different phases that you talked about.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's exactly what we do. And because there is less work needed to make the system visible by
Yeah.
doing that, because we've got a column for every state, I can look at that and I can see, my God, my development team are really oversubscribed to work at the moment, but the designers aren't doing much, or our testers are really busy at the moment, or the designers aren't up to much. So, okay, we'll put the designers on testing, for
Okay.
example.
Yeah.
So I can see the overall state of my organization and the project that I'm working on. Whereas with the card-based or the task-based view, you can't see that very easily. Now, someone might say, well, you can add different fields to the cards. You can show them, you can show who's it assigned to, what the stage of the process it is on the card. And you're absolutely right that you can do that, but then that requires me in every card to change those different configurations of
Yeah.
settings, whereas I can literally just move it to another column and it tells me very explicitly what the status of that task is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of related to what we were talking about in the last episode, wasn't it? It's how can we accelerate this? How can we make work into no work? How can we just make things as easy, as quick, and as efficient as possible? And obviously, just dragging a card across, very easy.
Yeah. Well, I think given that people, I I don't know what you think, Nick, whether you see this in your practice, but what I certainly notice is that people are really bad at keeping Kanban boards or any kind of task list up to date.
Yeah,
And I think that asking them to drag a card over from one column to the other is massively more simple than getting them to update all these different fields on the particular card and
yeah,
even put comments in. Sometimes, like, the very worst case of having a system-based Kanban board is that even if you do nothing else, you know the status of these cards. You know exactly where they are in the system. And that's the worst case. In the other hand, if no one does interacts with the cards at all in the other thing, then all you know is just something's in progress. You've got no idea what stage it's at
Yeah.
because there's been no interactivity with it.
Yeah.
Whereas in the other one, the system, it's the board itself is set up to create visibility around the stages. And so
Yeah.
I rely on the fact that, well, I assume that people hate updating cards, and therefore I define the board to support, to make it easy enough to support a, validation of the system status, which is, I suppose, comes back to my whole user experience background, because that's one of the fundamental principles of user interface design.
Yeah. You want to reduce
So,
friction as much as possible, right?
yeah,
Make
yeah.
it as easy as possible. And yeah, I mean, there's just a nice thing, isn't there, about moving it from there to there.
I,
You get a little buzz from doing it because it's
yeah,
a job done. It's
I think so. I think it's a dopamine hit, isn't it? A little dopamine hit each time, because you think it's making progress. I'm seeing it get to the end,
yeah. Or
and
it's not my problem anymore.
yeah, well, yeah, there is, and that as well, you know.
Yeah, I mean yeah.
So
No, I agree with you though. The to-do lists are one of those things that people really struggle with and to keep updated. And it's partly because we get, so often we get knocked off course by things. When you can make, I mean, obviously we've done the same thing for the articles as well, but when you can make the steps of the process more granular and more visible and share it with other people, well, that's the other thing about sharing. And I wanted to talk to you about this, and or just, I mean, I think that one of the things that sharing does is it gives us a reason to do the right thing. Whereas we might
yes,
say, for example, okay, well, I've done this job. I could tick it off on my, oh, we don't say this mentally, but I've done something. I could go into my task manager and say it's done, but I already know it's done, and it doesn't really matter to anyone else. But when things are visible, we are
yeah,
motivated in a different way because,
yeah,
yeah. So it's relevant, this, I think, because one of the things that happens, I guess, for your teams is when everyone's work is visible, when they're available, you can see they're available. When they're vulnerable because they're sharing their work, which might not be finished, which usually isn't finished. Does that allow for that kind of everyone working together, lifting each other up? So someone might notice, if I've not done the job that I'm supposed to do, or it's been
yeah. I
2
think
days and
so.
it could have been 10 minutes.
I think that one of the benefits of being visible is that you notice if somebody in your team, if your peers needs help, or if or someone notices that you need help. I think that it connects us. I personally believe it connects us more, because if I'm used to the fact, Nick, that we've got a process with the articles that we write, if I notice that things aren't happening in the way that we expect it to happen, then the first question I have in my mind isn't, you know what's Nick up to. The first question in my mind is, well, that's strange. I wonder if Nick needs a hand with anything. Haven't I done? Maybe I haven't done the thing that I needed to do
Yeah,
to make him successful. And it's the same with our development team. If I know I've got a pretty good sense of the cadence of the way all my team works, and if somebody is not delivering how they normally would, I can see that pretty early, which means that I can then give them a call and say, is there anything I can help with? What's the problem? Are you okay?
yeah,
And that again, it creates those connections, but it then reinforces trust.
yeah,
I was just thinking about this the other day when we first started talking about these principles in details between you and I, Nick. And I remember about, oh, it must have been 20 years ago, I worked for NHS Direct. I worked for the web development team there, and we were responsible for building the NHS Direct website. At the time, it was new. It's now old, and we had to build all the algorithms and stuff like that. And my team, the team that I was in control of at the time, we were working on something called the patient information booklet. So basically, making it easy for you to get access to patient leaflets. And I used to have a whiteboard up in my area of the office. And on that whiteboard, I used to have a sort of mocked up Kanban wall. And we used to have our post-it notes on there. And we used to just manually move these tickets over. And so I could see everyone, and this was in an open planned office, right? Anyone that was a stakeholder could see what my team was up to. They could see the cars moving. And as they came in, if they wanted to get one of my team to work on something, they were able to look at the board and they could see the volume of tickets on the board and how many were in the left, meaning needed to be done, versus how many in the right. And then they would ask themselves the question as they approached, is now the right time to interrupt this team?
Which is brilliant, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's for the team. That's
yeah.
fantastic.
And that's what visibility, that's what this visibility, or minding visibility. I can't say that's what visibility does for us, right? But by being mindful of being visible,
Mm.
it creates those opportunities to let other people know that maybe don't disturb us right now, we're pretty busy, or
Yeah.
actually, you know what, I'm available, come speak to me, you need to talk about something, let's do that. And it creates a much more human experience around doing the work that you do.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked about the value of being personally visible. Are you working? Or have you got your headphones on? We've talked about the value of the work being visible. And we've talked about visibility to clients. We've talked about vulnerability and what have you. But before we let you get back to your paddleboarding, is there anything else that's relevant around this principle of visibility?
I can't remember what we said. We said we're going to say at this bit, Nick.
Really
We're
screwed
going to
you on
have
that
to
one.
cut.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're just going to have to cut because you summarized everything. I was like, yep, tick that point off, that point off, that point off. And then I was like, oh, I got no points left.
Job done.
Sorry,
Good.
mate.
No, it's all good.
Is there
Um,
anything else? I think to answer that question, is there anything else that we should mention? I think that for me, it's a mindset thing, right? I think if we can be visible, if we can be vulnerable, then what we do is we reload the trust meter. Believe that's the currency that good businesses, good business relationships, and good delivery practices run on. That's
yeah,
what I firmly believe. I think the visibility aspect of what we do, and that being visible in the work that we do, making sure that everybody knows the status of the systems that we're operating. I mean that in terms of processes as well as the sort of technical infrastructure that we have. I think by making that visible, I think that we keep the bank of trust that we have between ourselves and with our clients high.
yeah,
And I think without those things, you fundamentally cannot have an accelerated digital delivery experience, because I think that to be able to do things quickly and well, to be able to do things that are, maybe you're punching above your weight in terms of, like I run a small team, but we deliver massive projects for our clients. And I believe that that's because we trust each other and because of the principles that we
yeah,
follow. There's lots of practical things, and we'll go into those in the future. We'll talk a lot about different ways of creating visibility and stuff like that. But the reality is why do we do this? And we do this because what we want to do is to keep building trust between ourselves, between us and our clients, and between the people that we report to or the people that we collaborate with. And I think, that's the bottom line.
mm,
Everything ultimately is about that and the tools that we use to use that to accelerate our delivery process.
brilliant. Right. Well, thank you. That was great again. We look forward to the next one. And yeah, in the meantime, don't fall off the paddleboard.
I'm going to
Speak to
send
you
you a
soon.
picture of me on my paddleboard.
Cheers.
Thanks, Nick.